Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. My book, Meaningful Coincidences, is coming out in a couple of days. That is, it's September 6th. This will be published afterward, but my book is now out, is what I can say when we're doing this. And I hope you pay attention to it. It tries to describe how meaningful coincidences happen, that is synchronicity, serendipity, and why they happen and how you can use them. And some people are describing it as the best book on the subject ever written. So I hope you pay attention to it, and you can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places online, and hopefully in some bookstores near you. And what I'm trying to suggest through these podcasts and my other activities like the Psychology Today post is that coincidences are a big part of your life if you pay attention to them. They don't exist if you don't see them, but if you don't look, you're not going to see them. So more and more in this world, believing is seeing. As we know very well that some people think the 2020 election in the United States was stolen, and they believe that, so that's what they see, and that's what they look for. And it's just not true. But coincidences are there, and you can see them if you look for them. And that's my job, is to increase the possibility that you tell each other coincidence stories. And here's one of mine. A couple of days ago, I was relaxing by the Rivanna River here in Charlottesville and Virginia, and I looked up to see what I call a herd of bugs zooming around about 2 feet away from my nose. I was lying down along the river, just watching the sky and the trees and stuff. Their motions seemed random and chaotic. I looked more closely. Each of them moved in curves. They never bumped into each other. More strikingly, they kept the shapes which kept changing, but they kept the shape that they kept, partly coincidentally with my trust in them, meaning that the more I trusted them, the closer they came to me. The more I relaxed, the closer they became to me. And then they begin to have a shape of a sphere, then an oblong ellipse. I said, okay, well, that's quite a little dance. I was trying to follow how the little bugs were moving with each other, but here they had that shape. So despite the chaos, they were still managing to create a stable whole. Could human beings with our driven individuality keep our shape while celebrating the curves of our personal trajectories? Trying to help that happen. So then I challenged them. This is all like no talk. I was just thinking. So I asked them to do a spiral. Please do a spiral, because I love spirals. A few minutes later, they created this upward tunnel, and within the tunnel, they had a spiral-like shape. Now, was that just a coincidence, or was my mind and this collective mind buzzing together? That's a question for us, but you can guess my idea, baby. I think maybe we were buzzing together. Our guest today is Yanik.
That's pretty cool, Bertie. That's I love that. That's fun. Now, if you had him do like a triangle and then a trapezoid, then we'd really be into something.
Well, you had to do 3 dimensions.
That's true.
You had to do, so it would have been a pyramid.
That's true. but there is that connection for sure that happens. And actually, that reminded me of another story. Maybe I'll share if we get time.
Go ahead, tell the story. Tell the story, and I'll introduce you.
Okay. All right. So I had been working with a Mayan elder, and he had been sharing with me. So we had met on a solstice event that we did, and so he did a fire ceremony for us, and we really connected about some different things. And then I asked to work with him directly, and he taught me this whole breathing technique called the hummingbird breath. And so he also does Mayan horoscopes, essentially. So Mayans were very well known for keeping track of, all sorts of celestial movements for 13 calendars. And so I've been very fascinated by the Mayan energy, leading up to 2012. And I think I might have told that story before on the show. I can't recall. Anyway, we'll go back to that too, because there's another big one there. So I had always thought my Mayan sign was this thing called Lamat, which is actually a rabbit or a star, or like a star seed even. And so he told me, he's like, no, it's not quite that way, because you were born in Russia, so it goes by Mesoamerican time, and so you are Monic, which is the deer energy. He's like, you'd be a mix because now you moved here, but really you'd be a Monic because that was what it would have been in Mesoamerica. I'm like, huh, okay, and I didn't quite believe him. And then as we're talking about it, he shows me the whole thing, and then there's a deer outside his front yard. He's like, look, here's a deer. I'm like, oh yeah, no, and then deers show, like I have deers every once in a while show up here in my house too. We're out in the suburbs in Maryland, and I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But it wasn't like this over the head like confirmation. So then maybe a couple days later, I'm out and just I'm out like at night, and I see a deer come by, and I just do this little. I've done this before, and nothing's ever happened. I'm like. And all of a sudden the deer comes over. I've never had this happen. The deer comes over and licks my hand.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay, that's pretty damn good. So that was one, big one. I'm like, all right, that, as I've been considering, like, do I have this deer energy or not? And then like 2 nights later, I'm up looking at the moon and not really paying much attention to anything else. And another deer comes over. I don't know if it was the same deer or not, but and it literally just comes over and licks my hand again. I'm like, oh, okay, that's and those are the only 2 times that's ever happened. And my wife is like, I told her about it. She's like, come on. I'm like, I've told you some other wilder stuff, and this is the thing that you don't believe me about. So the interaction between animals and us when you're in certain states, I think is so powerful.
Agreed. It's nice to be able to pick a story for our discussion today that bounces around in your head like that. So,
well, I got another animal one too that connected me when you were talking about that, like the swarm. When I was first learning how to meditate, I feel like anytime you're doing something that is maybe going to spiritually advance you, you get kind of like this beginner's luck, or this like, wing from the universe. A lot of times, where synchronicities are called, and so I've been working on learning how to meditate. I never thought I could, because I have a million ideas a minute. And I was in Maui speaking at an event, and one of my friends was running the event. He taught this whole meditation technique. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to check it out while I snorkel, because I can listen to my breath as I'm snorkeling. It's a lot easier. And so he told you to do the certain steps. And then when you went through it, at one point, I look, and I was surrounded by a school of silver fish. And I'm like, okay, that was pretty cool. And then a couple of days later, I had been doing this meditation technique every day. And then the last day, as I did it, I looked down, and there's a sea turtle down there. Like, and I had been wanting to see a sea turtle, but I kind of like, decided I was just going to let that go. And so the sea turtle is swimming with me, and I'm just like stroking his little, they're not called paws, but whatever they are. And just giving him a little pat, hello. And we swam for like 10-15 minutes. And it was like this huge, to me, I took that as this huge, like, you're on the right track with meditation, and this is, something to really pay attention to.
how do you explain let's say the fish and the turtle?
I think, again, like it's these non-local messages that, so one of the things that I once wrote in my journal was, synchronicity is a love letter from the universe across time and space.
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
Yeah, and I really like that idea, because it's in this loving way saying, here, pay attention. And whenever I encounter a synchronicity, there's a moment of just awe and surprise and wonder and amazement, and it just like, it's some of my favorite feelings of magic is what I would call it. And so it's like a way of paying attention. And so this silver fish enveloping me as I'm in this meditation process was just like a way of saying, okay, pay attention here. And it's not very often. I've been, I snorkel and swim and scuba, and I don't think I've ever been enveloped by a school of fish. And it was a group of silverfish too. Not, as my last name is Silver. So it was, to me, it's just another little confirmation of this is something to pay attention to. And so I've been meditating pretty much as a non-negotiable every day for, I think, maybe the last 9-10 years now after that.
So the fish helped you on your meditation path.
They did, yeah. And now I look back and I'm like, it's a total game changer. Like, I don't know how I would have, how did I do it before that? Because it's such a, wonderful practice of grounding, of mindfulness, of stillness, of really getting to know who I am. And so that's been really, really powerful.
My sense of how that happens is more here and now related, that you reach an energy vibrational state that is somehow compatible with living beings around you. And it's usually a relaxed state. It's usually being who you are in the moment, that you're in with yourself and with what's around you. And that's very much like what they're doing. They're just kind of swimming around being themselves. And they kind of like find something that's a little different. The vibration is a little different. And they become curious about it, and then they become like to feel it and be part of it, because it's a kind of a new experience for them.
Yeah, and then there's a back and forth that happens, I think, and it's powerful. Like, with your bugs that you're talking about, there was that back and forth. It really feels like when you're talking about, show me the spiral, and I don't think it was done in a harsh tone of stern. Show me a spiral now. It seems like it was a playful, loving, let's connect together.
It was telepathic, yes, and it was like, okay, I like spirals. Can you do one of those now too?
Yeah.
And yeah, they did. And it wasn't exactly. And the funny thing also about it is that as I learned to trust the swarm of the bugs, I started to be able to feel some trust for a good friend of mine, so that I could recognize my trust in her as I was trusting the bugs. So they taught me about trust.
Interesting. Yeah. So this is part of your, concept of what's the meaning personally, and then how do you explain it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let me do an intro on the silverfish guy. Yanik Silver has been called a cosmic catalyst, a maverick mischief maker, and a galactic goofball. He's no goofball anymore. He probably was at one time. He's like a really wise goofball. Maybe that's what the galactic part is. He redefines how business is played. He's a business kind of guy in the 21st century, at the intersection of evolutionary growth, impact, and fun. And Ionic, this thing of the infotainment thing of education and fun. I mean, I'm there with you. It's got to be fun to learn. It's learning, and learning is fun, and that's the way. Yeah. That's the best way things can develop.
Well, I have threatened to do a puppet show on Zoom. That's a business brainstorming show. So we'll see. Calling it Evil Schemes for Global Good. And Evil Schemes is an acronym for evolutionary, visionary, impactful, and legacy.
Well, wordplay like that is just it works so well. You got to do it. I mean, I want to do I want to get sometime to do a medley of the songs that I can sing.
That's great.
And get a little background music, because I don't know a lot of songs all the way through, but I have parts that I really like, and I'd add some Donald Duck to it, which one of my listeners didn't like particularly when I did that a little while ago.
They didn't like your impression, or it just hurt.
I can do that one.
That's good.
So Yanik is the creator of the Cosmic Journal, author of Evolved Enterprise, and the founder of Maverick 1000, a global collective of visionary entrepreneurs making serious differences in the world. And boy, if there's anything that's really important, it's getting businesses to pay attention to what's going on around us and not be their narcissistic ego selves, which we tend to see them to be. And Yanik is pointing in the direction that maybe that's happening.
I think so. I mean, there's a seismic shift happening, and it's been predicted, I think, by a lot of civilizations, and to me, business, since I have this notion, I call it bloom where you're planeted, and that was actually another
Say that
synchronicity.
again. Say that again.
Bloom where you're planeted.
Bloom where you're planted.
It planted it, so planet it. So there's another synchronicity, but the aspect of it is bloom where you're planeted, which is what industry or marketplace or where are you, like why are you there? And then there's probably been 5, 10, 20, 30 years that you've been there, and now you can show up as a light for that category or industry, and that's what I'm seeing in business too. But it showed up. So the Cosmic Journal was that little experiment that I did where 108 days, every single day, I drew an illustrated journal post, and it didn't matter if it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock, I would get one done. And I was going to illustrate this quote called bloom where you're planted, which is what most people have heard that quote. And I had drawn this big flower and spent a lot of time on it. And then my pen kind of slipped as I was so sleepy. And I wrote PLANE. And I'm like, oh, and I'd spent all this time writing this thing, so I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? So all right, there's no accident, so I'm going to create something else with it. So that became bloom where you're planeted, and so that's the page that showed up, and it changed that entire entry. So you can see I spent all this time drawing this, and then PLANE. So then that became bloom where you're planeted.
You have to explain that to me. I'm dense on that one.
So I'll read the entry, which says, as a multidimensional being, it might seem difficult to be on Earth during these accelerated times of learning. We long for our place in the stars, but you were brought to Earth for a definite reason. Slower. Okay. As a multidimensional being, it might seem difficult to be on Earth during these accelerated times of learning. We long for our place in the stars, but you were brought to Earth for a definite reason in this coming silver age. Bloom here and embrace being part of it and birthed by the Earth, literally grown from this planet. For this collective evolution, rise to the full merging of your personal self, higher self, and divine source. Step forth with everything you've learned in the exact spot you are planted or planeted.
Or planted it.
Yeah.
Planet it.
Planet, yeah. It's a made up word.
I know it is, but that's okay. I make them up myself.
But why are you planeted here? So and to me that
okay, now I got it. Why are you planeted?
Category? Yeah, where are you planeted? And for me, since it's a business space I play in the most, is like what industry or category, or how do you show up in that way that you can be a lighthouse or a beacon for others?
Such a good question for business leaders, but a lot of other people too. But business needs that a lot for the most part. This capitalistic drive for me, and more for me has to be unwound. And how are you helping people do that?
Well, it's through this paradox of the greater impact that you make, it's actually better for business. And that's what this shift is happening. So consumers, I don't like calling them consumers, but communities, people are buying from companies that have greater purpose and greater meaning. So they're changing their buying behavior by either switching brands or even paying more for companies that have that built into what they're doing. And then from the inside out, it's team members want to actually work for companies with greater purpose and meaning. And so if you want the best kind of team members and employees, then you really need that purpose. And so you're seeing more and more of this happening. And sometimes it's in an inauthentic way. It's more of a greenwashing or pink washing or a blue wash, whatever it would be. But it has to come from a place where I mentioned this idea of connecting your head, your heart, and your higher purpose. So the head is your business sense, and then the heart is your impact that you want to make in the world, and then the higher purpose is like, again, why are you planeted here? And when you bring all of that into alignment, there's something special that happens. The old way was, let's make a lot of money in the first part of our lives, and then we'll spend the next half cleaning up and giving back to what we did to kind of mess it up. And now what I'm seeing so much more is this integrated idea of we can really connect all of it together. And I was just talking to a new friend or colleague who's going to become part of Maverick. I think it's guy named Alex who runs a company called 4Ocean, the number 4Ocean. And he was a sea captain, and he got inspired by all this trash that was in the ocean. And he said, okay, I'm going to pull out a pound of trash and then turn them into something. Usually I have one of their bracelets on, but I don't have one today, but they turn them into these little beaded bracelets made out of ocean plastic. So you can directly see the impact they're making connected to their commerce side. So they've already, I think, pulled out, like, just in a couple of years, 25 million pounds of trash out of oceans and waterways. So it's all connected. So that's this idea of this paradox of that you can do good and do well at the same time. And that's what I'm excited by.
I'm excited about it too, especially hearing from you about how you're participating in this. I've got this idea of a collective human organism, and that, as you're implying, each of us must find our purpose within this collective human organism. And the collective human organism is trashing the planet, as you have just described. And how can we do, as in a even a larger way, beyond the businesses that you are working with, where it's so important, and so many other businesses that need to hear your message, how can we get more people to find their purpose and do good and do well for themselves and for the planet?
Well, I've been really inspired by this new way of people coordinating and coming together. These things that have been called DAOs. I don't know if
Called
you've seen
what?
this. They're called DAOs, DAOS. So, which is a great name, since it's, from the Tao, the Tao Te Ching, but they stand for decentralized autonomous organizations, and it's run on top of a blockchain. So it creates a way of, like, this is something that I've dreamt into for a long time, which is, I just want to bring together people I love who are incredible, amazing people, and have their unique capabilities and genius applied to something, and we all get to sort of play together, and then everyone's compensated in some way, and then we break off into other projects or whatever the case is. And this is some of the structure that allows that to happen. So I've been really, a lot of times you can look at, I don't really tend to watch too much of the mainstream news, but a lot of times you can watch news or see headlines and you're like, oh wow, the world is just really in a bad spot. And this is something that gives me a lot of hope, because there's new ways of organizing and bringing people together. That's good for the individual, because now this is called Web3 in some circles as well. So Web 1 was kind of a very, very simple website commerce, and then Web 2 was more like the Facebook and Twitter, where you became the product, and it was very extractive. Web 3 is that you own your own information, and so you become, you can actually participate in global projects like you're talking about, and there's ways of being compensated and being part of these coordinated movements, and it's really exciting. So it's something worth looking at. I'm going to a conference next week just on DAOs, and I couldn't be more excited to play around with it.
Somehow what you're describing reminds me of that swarm of bugs and their ability to be independent and yet part of the whole.
I'm glad you brought that back to that. Yeah, there's so much to learn from nature, and these are, some of the ways that the more we kind of just create, I don't know, like these guardrails, or not even guardrails, but just some ways of playing together. I really do believe most people want to, they want to contribute. They want to do something meaningful. They want to, like you said, have their purpose. So it's like, if they can find and put out their unique genius in a way that seems meaningful, plus you get the dynamics that have been working against us before, like this little device is designed to keep us hooked into it and send little dopamine hits and so forth. Like, how do you design something that is a win-win-win-win-win for the world, for the person, for the collective group? Like, that's when it starts getting really, really exciting. And there are built-in mechanisms here where there's full transparency, because it's built on top of blockchain. So it's kind of immutable. It's you can really see inside what's happening, and there's built-in, like, smart contracts, so that you don't have, like, there's not some central authority that has to say, okay, you're getting this or that. Like, it's all created by the group, but you're not losing the individual aspect.
For those who don't know what a smart contract is, why don't you tell us?
Well, I wish I could probably explain it.
Yeah,
in an
that's
easy
the
way. I'm
problem.
still learning a lot about it, but a smart contract is basically you built in something that happens without someone else. Like, so a typical contract is a legal document that is then signed by two parties and so forth, or ratified, and then there's someone else that has to verify it. And if someone breaks that contract, then there's the legal system that gets involved. In this, there's no friction. It's built in. If X happens, Y happens. If Y happens, then Z happens. So it's just a built-in kind of process. So it can be something like if a one, let's call it a dollar, but it's not going to be a dollar. But if a dollar flows here, then 50 cents will flow here, and that's built into the contract. So there's lots of mechanisms in there that just make it hands off, and that's that autonomous part.
Yeah, and what I remember hearing about smart contracts is that somehow you can get out of them in a way that's not enforceable.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in the crypto space or that field, but I'm very, very intrigued by what are the potential, especially with, it seems like so many people are coming from, this is a way to really like bake in higher consciousness. And I've seen this great meme of a Trojan horse with a consciousness inside, and that DAOs are this way of building
that's
higher
nice.
consciousness into society.
That's a beautiful image. It's the dragging the horse in and letting it loose inside the walls of the city that is part of the trouble. And sometimes that what was in the Trojan horse was not that helpful. It was kind of destructive. So it's still a metaphor that we can understand. Yet I've studied a bit about Web3, and we got to the virtual realities, and I wondered if you could have in the virtual realities that are being created on the internet, whether you can have synchronicities take place in the virtual reality.
I mean, why not? I think that there's opportunities for nudging or instigating synchronicities, and I love moments like that, but I don't think you can force synchronicities. But I think that you can play with them in some way. Like, so for instance, I have a set of cards that I created, these Oracle cards, and
Tell us about those cards.
Yeah.
I've seen them.
Well, the cards to me are ways of tapping into synchronicity, non-local intelligence in some way. So, it's so fascinating because you can take it from this very logical point of view, which is we're meaning making machines. So I'm going to pull a card, and of course I'm going to create a meaning because I'm just looking for, how does this connect? However, if you suspend that a little bit, you can really, like, I've had so many people tell me that they've cried from pulling the right card or pulling the right page in the journal because there's so much meaning there. And to me, that's not a logical left brain kind of analysis of, they're just making up a meaning. And so it's like, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, essentially. So anytime you're doing any kind of work like that, ceremonial work or working with, I don't know, those kind of energies in some way, it's like, if you can meditate for a few minutes or longer, if you can make it more intentional, and then also setting your intention about what do you want to see show up, and then you can pull a card and then see. It's powerful. And the cards are little journal prompts. They were based on my journal, and there's 44 journal prompts in there, and then also 11, which are some of my favorites. I call them cosmic Q&As, and they're 11 archetypes, and that you would have a conversation with using your right hand and left hand. And so those are really, really powerful.
Where can people get a hold of your book and your cards?
The cards are either at hayhouse.com or amazon.com, and this is what they look like. That's their the cards in the journal. Actually, you want to pull a card, Bernie? Should we pull a card and then talk some stories?
Here and now, coincidences are a part of the fun of this thing. Go ahead.
All right, let's pull a card. You can tell me when to stop. Hold on, let me shuffle a little bit, and then maybe we'll use that as some of our backdrop for our next conversations.
All right.
All right, so let's take 2 or 3 breaths together. Just breathe in with me. Big deep breath in and out, and in and out. All right, let's focus on, I don't know, magic and synchronicity and even more of how we can play together with the audience here. All right, so you tell me when you're ready.
Okay.
All right, this is our card. This is upside down. It says the activated ally. So
Wow.
I'll read you this little bit. So that's one of the cosmic Q&A cards. We don't have to do the full exercise behind it, but this is one of the ones that you would actually have a conversation with your right hand and left hand. But so the activated ally, the attributes are hero, mentorship, guide, and superpower. And it says there's a reason you admire certain characters, heroes, or mentors. Those you look up to represent a golden shadow. They reflect exactly who you are when you act from your highest self.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Golden shadow.
Golden shadow.
That's beautiful. Everybody, the shadow, we've got to work on our shadow. We got to pay attention to our shadow. It's usually thought of as dark, but
yeah,
now only the shadow knows, and Yanik too.
Yeah, so
there's a golden shadow. There is
a golden shadow, and I don't remember, and I love to give attribution, and I cannot recall if I got this from someone else or I just came up with this. So
let's say you just
most likely most likely it came from somewhere else. So, but let's just say
pause for a second about that one, because it's really important. It's that you came up with the idea of a golden shadow. It came.
I don't remember. I can't say for
came
sure
to you. It came to you. That's all I'm trying to say. And it's a great idea, which means that someone else has already thought about it, somebody's thinking about it now, or somebody will. And I have an example of that with the term simulpathity, which I made up, which was
I've never heard you say that one.
Simulpathity is experiencing the pain of a loved one at a distance. And I got to it. I got to it because I was choking uncontrollably, and 3,000 miles away, my father was choking on his own blood around the same time. So I was experiencing his pain at the same time. And I did a survey. Yeah, this happens kind of regularly.
I've heard many stories of it.
Okay, well, I didn't know that until, and I've heard more.
But I've never heard the term, but I've heard the stories of it. Yeah.
That's I got to make up a word just like you have.
Right. I like making up words too.
It's fun
because I started as a copywriter, so words to me are incredibly important. It's like words create our world. And
we can get into that one too, but I'll leave it alone for now. So I was wondering if anybody else had come up with this word. I made it up in 2014. So in 2016, I was running around somewhere and I found a little movie on Facebook entitled Simulpathity. Same word.
Really?
Yeah, same word. So I Facebook messaged the guy who produced it, and the simulpathity in this movie was about the same thing that I had defined it to be, feeling the pain of a loved one at a distance. So he not only came up with the word, but also what it meant was similar. And then he said he'd never heard of me. He'd never heard of me. He came up with it himself. So this is a way to say that we are all part of a collective mind. And some of us grab that fish of an idea out of the psychosphere earlier and then tell somebody about it. But somebody else probably could have come up with it already, but didn't have a platform to talk about it the way you have.
100%. Yeah, well, it's there's so many even famous inventions that were
we can go down that list
spot and another spot almost simultaneously. And
that's right.
There's I think the author's name is Stephen Johnson, who talks about innovation, and he calls it the next potential door is his theory about it, because it's like one building block leads to the next building block. But I think that there's something more, though. It's not just, oh, this thing created the possibility for the next thing. I think it is what you said. I like the psychosphere, that collective.
It's both of those. It's both of those. And one of the best stories is Dennis the Menace. In 1950, March 14th of 1951, in England and in the United States, the world was introduced to Dennis the Menace, one English version and one American version. And they each caused trouble. each had dogs that were part of their trouble. They were different too. And they tried to see if one plagiarized the other, and they didn't. And that's an illustration of simultaneous independent discoveries. And that's why I say, when you think of the golden shadow, it's a great idea. That means probably other people have thought of it. You have been able to articulate it, and you'll probably hear it other times. But let's go back to that, because it's such a good concept, Yanik, the golden shadow.
The golden shadow. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so I'll just finish reading this, and then I think it actually goes right into the story I wanted to share that you and I talked about, that has these multiple layers as I'm thinking about it. So it says, there's a reason you admire certain characters, heroes, or mentors. Those you look up to represent a golden shadow. They reflect exactly who you are when you act from your highest self. Who are you most attracted to right now? Call forth your ally. They can be anyone, dead or alive. It can be a fictionist character, doesn't matter. And then for this conversation, activate them now. And then this is where you would have a conversation back and forth with your activated ally. And then there's a couple sample questions here. But so something like, what's your best advice here? Which of your own characteristics do you see in me? Who are my other allies? What would you do in this situation? Which one of your attributes can I utilize for what's next for me? So this is where the process would be, you would write, I'm right-handed, you would write questions using your right hand. You'd call forth this ally, and then you write with your left hand as that activated ally, whoever you're bringing forth, and then you have a back and forth conversation. So really, really powerful in that way of getting answers and clarity on anything happening. And
Yanik, this card was not drawn by you sitting by yourself. It was drawn in our interpersonal context. So
yeah,
I began to look at this as something about you and me, not just about one of us.
well, yeah. So when you think about your golden shadow or hero or mentor, is there anyone that comes up for you?
Well, right now you're my hero as I'm talking to you, because you're doing something that is so very important, is helping turn business into doing good as well as doing well. And that's, I admire that in you. And the groups that you're helping to form, which to me are like the swarm of the bugs, where individuals keep doing their own thing, but are part of a cohesive whole that has a direction and a purpose. You're my hero.
Well, thank you, Bertie. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I love that. And I bet I'm curious though on your hero, like, and I've thought about this a bit on, attributes. So, and I won't mention the person, but there was a time when there was something happening, and I was like waiting for like recognition from this person I really looked up to. And one of my friends, who actually happens to be a shaman, she's like, well, let's unpack this a little bit. And she's like, what do you admire about this person? I'm like, well, that he's world changing in the way that he brings people together. He says yes to so many adventures. He's running multiple companies. He's just doing all these different things. And she's like, oh, that sounds a lot like someone else I know. I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah.
Same guy.
And so she helped me just like bring that into me as, again, this golden shadow of like, when you're in your highest self, how do you show up? And then it was really fascinating because it happened that night. This person started gushing about me and our organization. And it was just such a, like, I didn't even need it anymore. Such an interesting, energetic shift too. So the story I wanted to share, you and I talked about it really briefly, and it connects, I think, to this
you're saying a lot of stuff, Yanik, and it comes out really fast, and I'm a little slower than the way your mind is working, and maybe our viewers are also. You just transformed my idea of a higher self. I have communications from my higher self telling me what to do sometimes, and it's sometimes it's a good friend of mine telling me what to do too. And she represents a higher self as well, but sometimes it's not out. It's out there someplace in the psychosphere is where I imagine it. It's kind of this higher self and I are communicating with somebody from communicating together. But what you've just talked about is a higher self that acts on this world.
as the higher self. Yeah, like how would your, you know, when you're in your golden shadow, how do you show up?
It's bringing the higher self, to me, my image is bringing the higher self into here
Well, it's
action now.
both. It's you. Let's play with that, you know, up down, but it's
Okay.
both. It's you're coming up and it's down in a way.
Yeah, they're
but
merging, but you're
exactly.
still
The more, the more the
feel
merging happens, the more you are your whole
higher
self.
self. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That fits what I think I might be going now, but it makes the higher self more planted.
Planet. Yeah, you're becoming. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's exactly what it is. And that alignment again, the head, heart, higher purpose.
Yeah.
Bringing that
Beautiful.
alignment in, that higher purpose is, you know, the higher self. Some people don't like using that term of higher self, but I find that helpful. And activated ally is another way of thinking about it in that aspect, because you're working with archetypes, and there's certain archetypes that are really, you know, when you connect to that is your highest self.
Just a little bit, and we'll go to your story. But I'm watching this this series on Showtime called Ziwi, and it's a Black woman who's really funny, making clear some of our racial biases, our discrimination biases. And her show that I was watching yesterday was about allies. Who are allies of Black people, and who are allies of other people? And are you really an ally? What makes somebody an ally? Are you a fake ally or a real ally? And so the word ally has been bouncing around in my head a lot. So that's just a simple mirror coincidence that this card illustrates.
Yeah, well, there you go. Activated ally.
Yeah, activated ally. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so the story that I think, you know, even to me illustrates this a little bit, and you know, we couldn't have planned this, I think, any better, but it takes a little time to unwrap it. So you tell me where to stop and where to pull on some more threads. But it's powerful because, you know, one of the stories I was going to share had kind of one little layer to it, but the one that I want to share has multiple layers to it. So it takes a little bit of time to get into it, but I find the most interesting work with synchronicities and meaningful coincidences and so forth is when you have it, you can understand it, feel it, but then there's another layer and another layer that gets unlocked or over top of it, overlaid on it. So this was a cacao ceremony that we held. So our group does different, the Maverick group that you mentioned, we do different retreats and adventures and experiences for these entrepreneurs. And it's a combination of growth, impact, and fun. And we like putting them in interesting situations. And so we held a cacao ceremony in Costa Rica at our retreat. And the ceremony ended up being on January 11th, 2020. So, you know, already there's like a little bit of magic with 111. And 111 was already very meaningful to me in this cosmic journal creation. This is one of the original ones, because I finished the layout of it at 1:11 a.m. I finished the left-hand page layouts at 1:11 a.m. And it wasn't like I had an alarm clock. It just showed up. So certain numbers seem to be very, I don't know, like synchronistic numbers for certain people. Like it becomes a meaningful coincidence. Some people will think at 11:11 or whatever it is, but certain numbers also become these strings. So 1:11 was one of them. And so this was the very first, I had heard about cacao ceremonies, and cacao is how we make chocolate. But what, you know, most people don't realize is, you know, when you make chocolate, there's a lot of other additives added to it, of course, sugar and emulsifiers and all sorts of things that take away in some of the incredible health benefits of it. And the darker chocolate you eat is better, but this is raw cacao. That there's all types of different cacao. There's 5 types of cacao pods, and only one holds this medicine. And it is a real medicine. It's a real plant medicine. It's not going to make you hallucinate or anything like that, but it is a heart opener. And so it's a really powerful. And so in the scientific terms, it will it'll actually create make your blood thin more. So it creates these feelings of euphoria and so forth because of the blood thinning aspect.
Where do you get this brand of cacao?
Well, the brand that I connected to, it's called Cacao Magic. It's out of Costa Rica, and that's the very first one that I got, and it's cacaomagic.co. who's part of this story as well. And so there's lots of cacao. So you want ceremonial grade cacao, like it's a very high level cacao, and this. So then these cacao ceremonies, there's a how much intention you put into, like we were talking about earlier. The more you put in, the more you get out of it. And so very intentionally putting it in, the way you can even like speak to the cacao and hold intention with it, and how do you have gratitude for it? And so I'm actually having a little bit of this morning, not even knowing we were going to share this story. And so we do this cacao ceremony. The teacher was just sharing a bit of the cacao cosmology from an indigenous tribe called the Bribri tribe, BRI, which is one of the indigenous tribes in Costa Rica. And so amazingly enough, this is my first cacao ceremony, right? And then he's sharing this story of the Bribri tribe, which is where this cacao is grown. So it's all up and down Central America is where cacao is from. And even way back, we started talking about the Mayans on this call, but Mayans would use cacao beans as currency. There's something very, very powerful about it. They would use it in ceremony. And so it's been called theobroma, which is, I think, food of the gods is what it translates to, because of the incredible powers of it. And it really does have a lot to it. So he's sharing this cosmology with everyone as we're in this cacao ceremony. And part of the cosmology is this sloth. I've never heard a cosmology of a sloth as this creator of the universe. And this sloth named Cebu lives on this celestial hammock, and is kind of like thinking of the universe as like a plaything. And so everything is an energy and a plaything, and like Lego blocks, and which species are good for these certain jobs, and sending them forth. And then he gets to the part of the story and says, so Cebu is this being of not male or female, but all energy, and gets this part of saying, humans were created last, and Cebu says the humans, don't call on me again. And then Cebu's sitting on her hammock and thinking about, well, what happens if the humans forget? And so Cebu decides to share this medicine of remembrance with Cacao, being the bearers of this, the Cacao sisters, to bear this remembrance for humans. Goes to visit the Cacao sisters. Anyway, it's a bit of a long story how these 5 types of pods of cacao were created, and only one carries this medicine. But what this being did was transform herself into this old man, an ugly man. And in the Bribri tradition, you actually would welcome somebody with cacao. So these sisters, only one of them welcomes this old man with cacao, and then he asks her to marry him, and the other sisters are laughing. There's a whole part of the story, and so she accepts and says yes, and then he transforms himself into this being of 1,000 suns. And that's when the other sisters are like, oh, marry me. And like, no, only Cerula was the one that said yes. And so this idea of 1,000 suns, there's like 4 or 5 Maverick members that look over to me, and they're kind of like laughing and winking, because I've said for quite a long time, my mission is to light 1,000 suns who can each light another 1,000 suns. And it was just like this, this recognition that happened. And it was so powerful. And so even, we had this amazing ceremony, and everyone's heart was filled with it. And, I didn't think that much more of it. And then, it just kept coming back. Like someone else is like, you're the cosmic sloth. You are, you're Cebu, like this being of 1,000 suns, and you wanting to light 1,000 suns. Another friend bought me a sloth hat at the airport. And so it became like a little funny thing. And then, so during the sort of shutdown pandemic time, I reconnected to that cacao teacher, and then he's like, well, it's really my wife you want to talk to. She's the teacher. And so she just had decided, maybe I'm going to take on some virtual students. And I was her first virtual apprentice that she took on from Costa Rica. And it meant 6 weeks of nothing but cacao, and learning and connecting and communing with cacao. And she would send me off on these ceremonies and so forth. And it was just this incredible connection that I felt with cacao, and with that whole story, the Cebu cosmology story. So then fast forward, go ahead.
This incredible connection, when you say this incredible connection, there's something that you conveyed to me of feeling part of that connection for a moment. I felt part of that connection for a moment, but that through you, I could feel the web that you were in the center of.
Yeah, well, that whole notion of the thousand suns was a huge synchronicity indicator for me. And the funny thing is, sometimes you need other people to also recognize it, and that's fascinating to me too, right? So with the way I heard the story, and it's so the way our brains work, I wrote it down in my journal as the cosmic sloth. No, sorry, the cosmic slug. And I drew a little picture of the slug, which actually the slug is a very shamanic animal too. And but this sloth, I've never heard a cosmology story that involved a sloth. And then another Maverick member comes up to me. He's like, dude, you're the cosmic sloth. You realize that, right? And I wrote this little piece in my journal as he explained it. He's like, your greatest role is to hang out on your hammock and help us be the suns that we are, so that we can light other suns and this other stuff. So that playful aspect really connected to me. And then so fast forward a little bit, I take on this apprentice program with my teacher and really connect to cacao, and it's become my medicine. But the back in 2012, when we were really trying to decide what to do with Maverick, it was the first business that was kind of going sideways for me. And when I asked my 111-year-old self, so actually here you go, another 111 reference. And in my journal with my left hand, I wrote, light 1,000 suns who can each light another 1,000 suns. That was where it came from. And then we went to the Mayan Riviera and had an event where my whole team thought I was crazy because we did it for the 2012 calendar change, which was a couple of days before Christmas. And we went there, had this amazing synchronicity of getting out of a sweat lodge literally at midnight on the solstice. And that was, couldn't have been predicted. But it really said, okay, this is the right direction of what you're doing, this evolutionary growth. And so I really felt like 2020 was this bookend opportunity for the winter solstice. I hadn't been back there, and we ended up bringing a very small group, about 10 or 12 of us who wanted to travel during that time. And we went back to the same sweat lodge, the same Temescal, same shaman. He had been missing for a while. And I saw him, and I'm like, Freddie, Ochos Anos. And my friend, who's very fluent in Spanish, is laughing. And I'm like, Ochos Anos, Freddie. And he's like looking at me. And she's like, you're telling him 8 anuses instead of eight years. Anios is Ochos Adios. So anyway, we had this amazing experience. But then when we got to the retreat kind of villa, I see this rainbow hammock there. And it's actually not hanging up right now in my house, but the hammock, I knew that was Cebu's hammock. And it was literally like this whole connection where, again, a bookend to this very meaningful experience before in 2012. And so I had like kind of hinted to the neighbors who I met. I'm like, your hammock is amazing. And I wanted them to be like, oh yeah, of course, you can lay in it anytime you want. But I never actually asked for that. And so they're like, yeah, it's a nice hammock. And I was like, in the mornings I would go in there, but very sheepishly, like kind of like have one leg in, one leg out in the morning and watch the sunrise in this hammock and write in my journal. But then I was not fully comfortable in there. And then the next morning or 2 mornings later, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get in there and fully embody, Cebu, and fully embody this energy because of this hammock and how it's so meaningful. And it was an incredible connection. And then I ended up asking the neighbors. So this was a big thing for me to literally ask for exactly what I wanted. And I asked them to buy the hammock, and they were kind of laughing. They're like, it's really expensive. I'm like, okay, well, just let me know, how much it is. And it ended up being $100. And I had this $100 bill that I had been saving in my journal, that I had been drawing around and doodling around. And I handed that to them. And I'm like, well, you can have this one or a regular $100 bill. I'm sure they thought that, with the drawn one, they might not be able to cash it, but they're like, you can keep that one. But it was just another powerful aspect. So, okay, I get the hammock, which is a huge part of the story, of the Cebu story. And then Bernie, so this is the next layer. So maybe a couple weeks ago, I was just going through my journals and I realized the date of when I first saw that hammock. and the date was exactly 333 days from that January 11th, 2020 ceremony. So it was, again, this incredible synchronicity of a layer upon a layer. And so some of that is personally meaningful, but a lot of it is like, wow, how does that all just show up like that?
This last one of 333 is related to the 111.
Yeah, well, so 111 and 333 have kind of become the numbers that have been really big in my life as these activating numbers, or as these synchronistic numbers. And when I see them, they kind of make me pay attention.
Well, that's important for our audience to know, because other people have different numbers that activate
Right.
them. And when you say,
Exactly.
mine used to be 23, now what does being activated by a number mean?
I mean, for me, it means to, again, pay attention to really be like seeing what is happening there. And when it shows up multiple times, like that 111 inside the cosmic journal creation was a huge one. It really just means sometimes there's codes connected to, like, when that number shows up and you're paying attention, then like what is the energy that's coming in, what's the frequency, what's the vibration that is coming in, and for me, like, to go back and find that date and then be like, oh, like, how, that 3 like, it's not 335 days, it's not 321 days, it was, and I never go back and like count days from a calendar. It was just like this little random thought that came to me. I'm like, oh, I wonder, when I first saw that hammock, that was so meaningful to me. And then from that ceremony, and I go back, I'm starting to do some math. I'm like, oh my goodness, it is that. It is.
At the beginning, you talked about how we can put meaning into things because we are meaning-making machines.
Yeah.
What you're describing is very important to keep in mind, is that you have a feeling to look for the meaning. You looked for the dates, for example. How many
But
days?
that's not an always thing. It was not like, I'm always keeping
No,
track of
that's
every
what I
day.
mean. It's not an always. It's not an always thing. That's what I mean. That
Yeah.
you had the feeling that you should look because there might
Yeah.
be something there, and that's what you were able to find. It's that intuition that there might be something that is important to you that you'll
Yeah.
find by doing what you just did. That's an
Yeah.
important part of all this.
And let me wrap up that activated ally part, which is, the Cebu, this cosmology of this cosmic sloth, that's become my higher self in a deep way. Like, it's become an ally for me because of that energy, of that playfulness, and the universe creation, and all of that. So
that's nice. That's really good to wrap up with that. How the sloth became your ally.
right.
That's almost the title of this. I'm not going to make that the title
The
of the
cosmic sloth.
The cosmic. There's a book called The Magicians. It's 3 volumes, and in one of them, a sloth plays an important part. You'd have to dig around to find it, but there's a sloth that they put in the bottom of the boat and just hanging around down there in the hold, and the play with that sloth might be intriguing to you because it's so part of it and so not part of it, and yet part of it is like fun to be able to think about. Now, as we wrap up for today, Yanik, I'd like you to put together for our audience the golden shadow and the story of the sloth.
Well, to me, that 100% represents my golden shadow. So when I'm in my highest self, when I'm embodying that, it is that playful aspect. We start off this conversation talking about play and business and infotainment and so forth, and that playfulness. I mean, I have, there's a puppet sitting over my shoulder right now, and that playful aspect, and then also this, the archetype of this cosmology is a universe creator, and everything is like a Lego block and a plaything. And so that's the way I think about things a lot, that I've been considering for literally a decade plus, of how do we nudge consciousness using the leverage of business. And it's about these seeds and suns and then blooms and how they all connect together. So it was a massive affirmation for me, and then also just a new way of leaning into this funny little, there's almost no way of saying the cosmic sloth without having a smile on your face. And then people have started referencing me, and maybe I need to change the bio as, been referenced now as a cosmic sloth, because it just becomes that joyful expression of who I am.
Suggest replacing the cosmic goofball with the
There you
sloth.
go, galactic goofball to the cosmic sloth.
It's there's something. You have to go like that. Yeah, I mean, that's what I would suggest. Now, one final question for me with this: as you develop businesses to be more conscious, you try to get expanded consciousness into the business way of operating. How does synchronicity play a role in that?
I think it plays a big role of, it's like where you can start paying attention. To me, it's about awareness. And the more we can bring our awareness to these moments that have these new not even new feelings, but these feelings that are meaningful for us, and being open, not like forcing the meaning, but allowing it to show up. There's so many ways, especially as, a lot of the entrepreneurs I work with, they ask this question of now what? They are successful, they've been successful, and it's like, okay, there's something more. And a lot of times that is led by synchronicity, because it's not the exact same linear path that they've taken before. So now it's being open to these intuitive feelings, these things where we're really connecting our whole brain and our whole selves.
Absolutely. Being open is one way of saying that. I would suggest that you also consider that the conditions under which synchronicities are more likely to happen are conditions of change, where there is where the quotidian regular reality begins to break down, the scheduling, the organizing. No, that web is kind of like frayed, and new stuff starts coming in, can become in, and that's when you can increase, or at least notice an increase in synchronicities.
Yeah, I love that. And we have that happening on a global scale right now, where things are changing dramatically. And then we have that, I see it a lot on an individual scale too, where
we're all part of that whole thing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I still say with the metaphor of the frog in the boiling water, in the water that's gradually being heated up, and the frog doesn't know that it's gradually being heated up, and humanity is being heated up now, but it's gradual, so they're not paying attention. If you turn the heat up really fast, the frog will try to jump out. But now this frog is not trying to jump out, and we need to be able to help us climb out of this beginning to boil pot. And synchronicity, to me, is one way that a key way that we can help people to be able to do that.
I totally agree. I think synchronicity is such a major, if we can even call it that, an ally in our journey and our purpose and our quest. Yeah,
it's an ally. Yeah. Well, Yanik, I'm glad. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you. I mean, you've got so much stuff running around between your ears, and higher than that too, that you're putting, that's coming into your head too. It's not just you over there. You're tuned into a lot of stuff, and it's coming. I got a chance to hear some of it coming out, and it's remarkable what you're doing. And I applaud what you're doing with businesses, because it's so very important as we watch a fascistic tendency in the United States, where corporations are playing a part in that, and some of them are breaking away from that fascistic attempt and trying to keep democracy going a little bit more, where we have our own ability to decide our own future and not somebody else doing it. And so what you're doing is politically extremely important.
Yeah, well, I think it's the time. I mean, again, like all these civilizations and ancient ones talked about these prophecies of this great year, and especially the Mayans were talking about this, but that we're in this time of ascending consciousness, and there is these breakdowns that are going to happen because the systems weren't designed for human thriving. So that means that every institution is really up for renewal, and it's going to be the innovators and change makers and entrepreneurs and leaders who can step into this, and hopefully using synchronicity as a guidepost for what they're meant to be doing in this time.
That's what I'm here to help have
Yeah,
happen,
exactly.
that part of it. And I admire what you're doing, and I'm so glad we got a chance to talk. So thanks very much for talking with me, Yanik.
Thanks, Bernie. It was fun.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.